Click the Patreon link in
So the first thing I want to do is say thank you to those of you who have recently become my patrons via Patreon. There's a number of you that this Christmas time, this winter season, jumped in and joined the bandwagon. I really appreciate that. It always encourages me to keep moving forward. Not that those of you who are already my patrons don't. That's just it, though. Every time that I know there's going to be a reward, even if it's just a human, tangible reward for this, it keeps me pushing forward. So, for example, today, it's this January 3rd. I'm not really wanting to come back from vacation yet. I'm back at my job as a pastor, barely. But I'm not really wanting to come back. I'd rather be continuing to play a little Fallout today. But you know what? I think, no, I got all these people. They're willing to pay for it, so we better do it. So we're going to do it, and it's because of you. So thank you, those of you who are willing to support and keep my the fleshly side of my motivation going. There's a saintly side too, of course, but you know how the battle goes. And a super special thank you to that one large gift that came in. You know who you are. You talked with me via email, and I did not expect what you gave. So thank you so much. I'm not quite sure how best to put that to use. I got a couple of ideas, but that's really, really cool. Thank you so much for thinking of me with your Christmas bonus of all things. What a kind and generous gift. Speaking of generosity, I do have to throw another hat tip out to the McPherson Group. This is that group of legal counsel that helps and specializes in IRS tax law, who recently helped Worldview Everlasting finally put the kibosh on its existence, which was easier said than done. And there were a few corners that had some cobwebs in them that needed to be cleaned up and things like that. And it's because of the McPherson Group and their generosity, again, their donation of their time and efforts to us, that enabled me to get back to focusing on this work here. So beatirs.com is where you can find them if especially you need some help with some back taxes or IRS trouble, auditing, those kinds of things, and you want a legal counsel to see you through it. beatirs.com for the McPherson Group. Thank you very much, McPherson Group, for the help you have given me. So probably around a year or so before the word of the Lord came to Jeremiah when he was imprisoned, telling him to write all these words down and have them read to the king, and the king sitting in his grand and cold hall sliced paragraph after paragraph of those words from God up and burned them in the fire. And Jeremiah was told to flee for his life. But a year before that, maybe two, it kind of depends. I mean, was it the first year that the king proclaimed the fast to try to stir up people against the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, who had made him his vassal? Was that the time when Jeremiah did this? I think so. But could it have been the second year? Maybe. But if it was the first year, about a year before that, right? So this is commemorating, in fact, this issue. About a year before that, the city is under siege. The armies of Babylon are outside the walls, including Nebuchadnezzar himself, not a king at the moment, simply the commander of the armies of Babylon, that great city in the land of Shinar where his father, Nabopolassar, still sits on the throne, though he's aging and not really necessarily known to Nebuchadnezzar, very close to death by means of his old age. And this siege is largely unexpected because, well, Judah was supposed to be safe. They had allied themselves with Necho, the Pharaoh of Egypt. And Necho was a boss. I mean, this guy was a world power of old on the rise again. Now, Egypt kind of waxes and wanes in history, but they were always a threat. They were always there, and he was expanding. And nobody could really stand in his way. And because the real school ground bully, Assyria, who had likely been dominant in the region since Ashur, the grandson of Noah, had established dominance in the area and founded the city of Nineveh, great city. Well, Assyria, for the first time in centuries, maybe even a millennium, is on the decline. And Egypt, again, who has risen and fallen, Cush, the Cushites, children of one of Noah's grandsons as well. Well, they see an opportunity, and Necho presses them up into and toward that Fertile Crescent, right? You learned about that in school, the Tigris and Euphrates region. And Assyria is not quite there, but it is on the northwest end of that, the far northwest end. And I should say, when I say northwest, I mean, as an American would look at the map, to them, I believe they would have been on the far east of it, but that's just because north to them wasn't necessarily north to us. I mean, they meant it's a long story. They meant what they said, but because of the location of the seas, it just kind of got tweaked a little bit. It wasn't like they didn't know where north was or where the stars were, but they would have called this the east. So if you're looking at the Tigris and the Euphrates, remember they're just kind of two rivers that run down next to each other. Nineveh is way up at the start of the Tigris. It's actually before the Tigris really becomes the Tigris. Anyhow, what matters is that this region, which had totally dominated everything in every direction, toward Phrygia and Urartu and the Medes and Persia to the east and Babylon to the south, and all the way down, and even exercising sway, or at least a massive check. When it's not sway, it's a check on Egypt. They are now in decline. And we mentioned this before. It has everything to do with the Scythians, these barbaric horse-riding peoples from the plains of Asia who, remember, Assyria's dominance extends over the Black Sea and into that Asian region. So they kind of brought it on themselves when they ran into these Dothraki, right? The Dothraki aren't real, but that's the image. So they ran into them, and anyway, they fought back. And over time, their attempt to corral that side of the world has brought them into chaos. And so Necho takes this opportunity, the Pharaoh, and he burgeons up and he gets all the local kings to swear to him, Jehoiakim being one of them, and he makes an assault on Assyria. And Assyria is in collapse, but see, there's another major power that's like, yeah, we're over here too. And that's Nabopolassar and Babylon. And seeing that there's this other upstart, kind of an equal over there, maybe even lesser so. I read somewhere that Necho had actually been in subjugation to Babylon, that he was a satrap of Babylon. That means, a lesser ruler. Daniel will become a satrap. But I read somewhere that he was. So this is even maybe more of an upstart than just two similar guys vying for territory in a region. In either case, Nabopolassar says, you ain't coming across that Euphrates River. Oh, no. Oh, no. You go back down to the Nile and be happy there. Oh, wait. Let me put you there. And he sends Nebuchadnezzar, right? It depends on how you read his name and where you read his name. This is another tangent. But the ancient world, spelling didn't matter quite so much. And it's because it wasn't a print culture with a printing press the way ours is. It had everything to do also with the shifting of the language. So you would write what you heard, and then what you heard, the ends of words would often change because of the conjugation. We don't do this in English with our names. So if my name's on the front of the sentence or the back of the sentence, subject or object, it doesn't change the ending. But there are modern languages that do that, and most of the ancient world languages definitely did that. So you have all these different kind of like renditions of what his name is. Nebuchadnezzar is just kind of the way we've got it now in English, just like we have Jesus, even though no one in Jesus' day said Jesus, they would have said Jesus, and no one before that would have said Jesus, they would have said Yeshua. Right? So over time, the languages shift the name. So Nebuchadnezzar is just one way of saying Nebuchadnezzar, and he gets sent out to fight Necho. Now, I know this is review, but review is good. I want to remember it myself, so I need to keep repeating it. Yeah. So hopefully this isn't boring you, because we did do this some last time. But, as Kyle and Dalich would tell it, in consequence of this, Nebuchadnezzar took the field against Hither Asia in the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, and in the 1st month of the 4th year of Jehoiakim slew Pharaoh Necho at Carchemish, and pursued his army to the confines of Egypt, and in the 9th month of the same year took Jerusalem, and made King Jehoiakim his subject. Now, that's where we want to be, is in that siege of Jerusalem. But a note on dates and times. We touched on this a little bit as part of why we even looked at Jeremiah in the first place last time. But what the third year mentioned there by Kyle and Dalich is their reckoning of how this really adds up the way we would count reigns and years. There's a problem with the ancient world's recollection of kingdoms. It's not quite as the proverb goes, the victor writes the histories, but it's not unlike that idea either, that they don't always count it the same way. So you might count the reign of the king from the year he was born, or you might count the reign of the king from the beginning of the year that he became king, even though he wasn't yet king at that point. Because of this, you have things the Bible says, verses in the Bible about the reigns of kings that actually disagree with each other because they're recording from different perspectives. And this gave the liberal scholars of the 1800s and the 1900s and even today, they gives them fits. Actually, they love it. They cackle and roll on the ground and say, see, the Bible's stupid. And they actually are just very ignorant in their understanding. There's a fantastic work by Dr. Andrew Steinman called From Abraham to Paul, where he does a very good job of reconciling these dates and showing how the Bible really is telling it like it is, and with some real historic reason for telling it the way they tell it. So Kyle and Dalich do the same thing, and I think, from what I'm reading, that makes sense to me what they're saying. I just don't want you, if you go to read your Bible and you see that it doesn't say third year of Jehoiakim in every place that Jerusalem falls, that you're like, oh no, what's wrong? And it's probably not the point you're going to remember from this episode. But it's a good point to know, because when you are reading Daniel and Jeremiah and 1 Kings and 1 Chronicles, you do have some of these so-called discrepancies, which are in fact not discrepancies but perspectives, fully valid in the way that time was understood and recorded, in the way that records were kept back in the day, just not valid when you have Wikipedia. Right? Because in Wikipedia, we can all see the same thing, and so we correct it, and we bring it a line, and our calendars are all synced, right? Synchronized watches. It's that kind of thing. Well, they didn't have that. So they reckoned it as they reckoned it, and we take it for what it is. And it's in the third year then, the way we would reckon it, the third year that Jehoiakim is sitting on the throne, that the armies of Babylon, having defeated Necho at the Euphrates, and pushed his armies all the way back to Egypt, where they subjugated them and made somebody else swear fealty to them. On their way back, they go and they pick up everybody else in the area. They're like, oh yeah, by the way, you thought you were with him, now you're with us. Here's your chance, right? And so here you have the city of Jerusalem surrounded by this massive army that's out to destroy a much greater army than they could possibly mass. And you got to think a little of the Rapshika kind of thing. This wasn't Rapshika. That was actually years before this. But it's that kind of thing where you're calling from the street up to the gates, and you're saying, hey, listen, look, we can kill you, we can starve you out, or you can serve us and pay tribute to us. And at this point, Daniel is probably about a 15-year-old kid in the city. 15, 17, 13, somewhere in there. Let's say 15 for the story. So imagine where you were when you were 15. What, were you a freshman in high school? What mattered to you in life? Right? I can only tell you what mattered to me in life. I got up, I went to high school. I had to do the homework because I had to do the homework because that's what a good kid does to go to college, to get a job, to have money. So I did my homework, but I hated it. And I liked girls too much, and I was afraid of them. So I didn't talk to them much. I was really shy, so I never really smiled at them. I kind of smiled with my grimacy face. I still do it today. Half a smile. Oh, well, maybe she'll like me. That kind of stuff. But I love sports. And so I also just really got into sports. That was kind of what I lived for every day after school. What am I going to play? How am I going to move? What am I going to do with this ball? How am I going to show that I'm better than you with this ball? Right? That was life for me. That's what I worried about. I did not worry about my city being surrounded by a horde of armed men who were interested in, well, raping and pillaging. I didn't worry about that. I mean, Persian Gulf War, I got a little nervous because I didn't know what it was. Whatever, right? Not the same thing. And I also, I went to church, and I would have told you that I cared, mainly because I feel like I had to. I was supposed to care. And my dad worked for the church. He wasn't a pastor, but he worked for the church. And so, yeah, I care about God and stuff. But, I didn't care. That's all a bunch of bunk. As just a kid being a kid. Well, Daniel not only is facing this significant issue with the city being surrounded by an army, he also is, and we'll see why, or this is proven later, but you got to believe it about him at the time, he also cares. Now, this is pretty cool if you put all the pieces together, because he shouldn't care if you know much about Judah and Jerusalem, because there have been 2 generations of faithless kings that have done everything they can to destroy the ability to have faith in this area. Manasseh, who you know that name, right? One of the worst. And then his son Ammon, who actually is so bad on so many levels, he gets assassinated. Josiah is the son of Ammon. So I shouldn't say 2 generations of pure faithlessness, because you had then, in the midst of this unbelief, you had this reformation. They find the book of the law down in the temple. They do all the reforms. They cut down the high. I mean, Josiah does so much according to the way the words are written. But it tells us, the Bible tells us, that the people of Israel didn't really buy into it as a whole. And so when Josiah dies and Jehoiakim, his son, takes the throne, he just goes back to everything the way that it was. But here's the thing. You got a couple people somewhere for whom Josiah's reforms did make a difference. And Daniel's one of them, right? So follow this. Josiah reigns for 31 years. And his reforms, with finding the book of the law and putting it all into practice, well, that's in his 18th year. He reigns 31 years, so there's about 13 years there before his son takes over and reigns for 3 years, so 13, 17. So if Daniel's a little bit older at this time, guess who was a baby during the peak of the Reformation? And he definitely would have grown up seeing all these changes take place. How cool is that? Right? It's like your best Christmas memories from church. Not the ones, I know you like Santa Claus, whatever. I don't. It's my thing, whatever. But think of the real Christmas traditions, the ones that actually matter, the ones that are going to endure into eternity, that you remember from church. What is it? Singing Silent Night? I don't care. But you grow, remember that one as a kid? And it still means something. Even if you fall away, it still means something now. Well, so he's getting this, the Torah, the high promises of God according to the covenant, as a young man growing up, as a noble in the house of Judah. So all those who go with him to Babylon, they're from the nobility, or at least the wealthier classes. So now he's this 15-year-old kid who has bought into this stuff, right? And he's watching the city be surrounded by an army that, according to this other guy who's piped up and started preaching recently, Jeremiah, who no one wants to listen to, at least most people don't. He's taken all sorts of heat for it, but he keeps showing up and shouting words. According to him, this army was going to come, has come, and is here because of the falling away of the practices which had been put into place for the last 13 years by Josiah, and now for 3 years more are being destroyed by Jehoiakim. The faithlessness of Jehoiakim. So here you are under the reign of a king who you know is diabolical, evil, and going to bring people to ruin because of his faithlessness to the covenant, and yet you believe the covenant, and you're watching this army here. And what must that be like? You think we got it bad today. We just don't have as many people in the pews as we would like. And yeah, sure, is it easy to find faithful preaching? No, it's not. It's not. Just sit in Daniel's shoes for a moment. And then watch from Daniel's position. What is he on the wall? Maybe not. But the city's listening to what's going on one way or the other. Be in his position as you learn that the king, rather than die, which is pretty much the only option he had because he was not prepared for this war at all, submits and becomes the vassal to Nebuchadnezzar and Babylon, the house of Nebuchadnezzar's in Babylon, and opens the gates, and some of the armed troops come into the city, and you see their foreign weirdness, right? They're all dressed funny. Maybe they got tattoos, they got piercings and stuff everywhere, which the Jews didn't really have. You only pierced yourself if you were a slave. So, they're all sorts of different, all sorts of pagan looking. And they come in, and then all the houses are kind of called together in this big noble get-together celebration. But at this big noble get-together celebration, you're called over, and whether it's the king or whether it's one of his appointees, he introduces you to this other group, right, who may not have been Nebuchadnezzar, may have been him, may have been one of his people like Ashahaz, who we're going to talk about a little bit later. But you're brought over, and you're like, well, tomorrow you're going with them. So pack your bags, and probably won't see you again, but they promise it's not going to be a bad life. Thanks for doing this for the kingdom, son. That kind of thing. Way to step up for your country. And so he and others, how many, we don't know, but a decent number, that night, right, they're packing their bags. And the next day, whenever this is, right, as they're pulled out of the city into this army, in this huge mass of troops and other nations, like they're brought into a tent of some kind. I mean, I'm speculating how this happened. We know it happened. I don't know how it happened, so I don't know if there was a tent, right? But they're brought into some place where you're seeing people from the Phoenicians and the Philistines and the Moabites, right? Everybody's been conquered. Everybody. You're not alone, right? Everybody's been conquered, and they're taking the wealthy, the nobles from every group, and they're putting them all together. So you're seeing these other groups, your enemies in some ways, historically, but here they are. They're right there with you. And they're all young. They're all good-looking, because they only took good-looking ones. The Bible only mentions the men, but we'll come back to this. You gotta believe there was guys and girls. They probably kept them separate, but I think there's girls. But we'll come back to that. But they're all good-looking, and here you are. And then, as this has happened, you also watch. So as you're being brought out to this tent, right, you're seeing something else going on. That the king is bringing out of the temple courts some boxes. And you're like, what's this? And these boxes are brought down on, there's no Ark of the Covenant being brought out, but there's some special boxes that are brought out, and it's set down before the Babylonian envoy, and it's opened up, and there are these implements of gold and silver, these very high quality, priceless, finely worked tools for worshiping the Lord Yahweh, God of Almighty, which then are delivered over to the envoy from Babylon. And you watch it get boxed back up and put into the pile of all the booty, right? All of the goods from all these other nations, this big collection of gold and silver and pearls and who knows what, right? Rugs, spices, all the valuable stuff. Big screen TVs and Maseratis. Yeah? But see, you're Daniel again here. You're not you. And so as you're watching this happen and you're knowing you're being taken away from this city that's actually prophesied to be destroyed, and yet with it is coming some of the holy things, you got to know a number of issues going on. You know you're being spared in one way. Something strange is happening here, and yet you know this is so wrong. Because now even if you repent, King Jehoiakim, guess what you can't do? And now you can't actually follow the covenant because those implements are going away. Now there's one last thing about these vessels from the temple that is pretty important to see at this moment that is happening right here. Because, yeah, you would think this is Jehoiakim being faithless. This is him not believing. This is him just giving up, and he's plotting his own overthrow already, right? I mean, the next year he's going to have his fast. He doesn't think that he is going to serve Nebuchadnezzar forever. He thinks he's an upstart who got lucky against Necho, and now he's got a chance on the region because Necho's gone. He can actually see himself becoming the world power at some point if he just plays his cards right. So it's not like he thinks he's lost this gold forever. He doesn't really care about it being holy per se. But here he is doing this because it's part of his plan. And you think, oh, what happened? How is God's stuff being taken away? But see, this is part of God's plan. Because it is by means of those same implements, those same vessels, those same golden cups, that Babylon is going to be destroyed. Not Nebuchadnezzar, but his son. That whole writing on the wall thing, it's these vessels, right? And we'll come back to all of that. But think about this as the poison pill. The poison pill that Nebuchadnezzar swallows. That while he is in fact doing God's will to punish God's people, he is also setting up God's punishment against his own people. And the Old Testament constantly is working this way. God raises up the wicked to punish the wicked, but the wicked don't get away with it. Yeah? And we'll get into this too. This is also the salvation story of Nebuchadnezzar. This is about his own conversion. Did he know? Was he the one who was there and having all these youths brought before him? He wasn't king yet, so it wouldn't have been below him to do this work. Yeah? Just to choose the best and the most beautiful, especially if he's picking girls for, say, a harem. I mean, I think he'd want to have a say in the matter. So did he meet Daniel as a 15-year-old kid that night, that time, as he then takes the poison pill as well back to destroy Babylon? Now, if you know what a poison pill is, it is the way I'm using it, it's a term used in sports contracts where you sign a contract in such a way that it's really cheap for you to pay for an expensive player early, but then 3 years later, you're backloading the payments so you can get the guy kind of on loan to play for your team. But if you don't win and make a whole lot more money soon, then by the end of that contract, he's sort of an albatross because you can't win with him and you can't trade him because now people have to pay him that full amount. So it's called a poison pill. Anyway, it's a way of inserting something that does no damage initially, but the more time goes by, the more damage it will do. And see, that's these vessels taking the Holy of Holies from the holy place, right? So anyway, I think that's pretty cool that Daniel's there with this stuff. Did he see it? Did he know it was happening? I don't know. But he's in the same envoy now. He's in the same group. And as they move north, which is more just kind of northeast along the water, along the way the Jordan River would flow, but the opposite direction. As they move that direction, this is when Nebuchadnezzar hears that Nabopolassar, his father, is dead, and he cuts across Arabia with a small group to go back. But Daniel's in this train of people that is gradually going to make their way up. And remember, they're still subjugating others as well. So they're being brought in front of other cities and having to sit there in the tent with all the, the Phoenician kids and the Philistine kids. And they're just having to wait. More kids are brought in. More tribute is given. More people swear allegiance. And gradually this huge, huge crowd of people make their way back. They start moving into the region, right? The actual Fertile Crescent. They cross the river. They come back into Babylon. And are you tired? What do you know? What do you believe? He still believes the covenant. We know this. What words does he have to cling to? Only those that he was taught. And he would have been taught them. He would have probably had a good number of Psalms memorized. He would have known portions of the Torah itself, the first 5 books of Moses. He didn't have the prophets quite the way that we do. Yeah, that's later. Or that's now, I should say. He didn't have all the writings. Second Kings wasn't written yet. That's what's going on right now, right? But he knew enough. He knew enough. And we'll see that as well. But now you might be imagining that, where are they going to put us? What are they going to do with this crowd of youths? Are we going to be sacrificed? Are we going to be slaves? I mean, they told the guy at the party that, we were going to have a good life, but, we saw what Assyria did to people. Why would Babylon do any different? Well, it is the thing. They did. They took them, in all likelihood, directly to Borsippa in Shinar. Now, Borsippa in Shinar may not mean much to you. I get it. Yeah. I can tell you where Tatooine is, yeah? And I can point to Gondor on a map. But Borsippa in Shinar, I'd have a little trouble with that. But it doesn't matter where. What you got to do is you got to hear what this place sounded like to the Chaldeans, to the Babylonian people. To them, when they heard Borsippa in Shinar, you know what they thought of? They thought of Hogwarts. And I'm not kidding. I'm not kidding. This was the school of the Magi, right? It's Hogwarts. It's where the enchanters and the diviners and the whisperers and those who could read the stars and those who could speak with the gods and those who had the gods inhabit them and those who were able to cast spells upon you with a wink and a blink and a Expelliarmus. It's where they got trained. It's where they got trained. Now, there were actually 2. There was Borsippa in Shinar, and there was Hipparine in Mesopotamia. But Shinar is actually the center of Babylon itself. So this is where we know Daniel went. He wasn't off further in Mesopotamia. And I love thinking about that a little bit too. I don't know if you like Harry Potter or not. I really enjoyed the books when I read them. Haven't read them again. And my kids read them repeatedly. But I really enjoyed book 4, where there's this contest of schools. They have like this Eastern, I think they're Russian magic school, like float over and sit beside Hogwarts, and then all year long there's competitions between the two schools, and you already have this competition thing going on in Hogwarts with the houses, Slytherin and Hippogriff, it's not Hippogriff, Hufflepuff, and all that, right? And so you have that like amplified for the whole year long, and there's like a little rivalry going on. Well, there was that kind of rivalry going on within the politics, within the Enchanters. They had their own two schools. I mean, we got the same thing today with St. Louis and Fort Wayne. If you're an LCMS, at least, you got to know this, right? We had two seminaries, and, they play basketball against each other twice a year. And St. Louis has won every game for 30 years or so. I was part of that. I'm kind of proud of that. I'm not proud about a lot of other things coming out of that school, and I wouldn't send my friends there right now. I'd say go to Fort Wayne, play basketball there, win a game. But the rivalry, whether for good reason or ill reason, is real today, and it was real then. It had to be. So that's kind of a fun thought. Daniel is brought into this massive pagan exotic city and taken directly to Hogwarts, a region that had its own like element of the city. They had their own blocks and houses and dormitories and markets. I mean, it was set off by itself. They even called them the Chaldeans. Other Chaldeans would call them the Chaldeans, right? This is that place. It's that special. And the school was that special. You didn't get into this school without the right test scores, right? You had to go to the right preschool, so you go to the right kindergarten, to go to the grade school, to go to the right high school, so you could get into this school. As worse than that, you had to be born in the right family to go to the right preschool and so on to get into this school. But birthright wasn't enough. You didn't just have to be born in the right place. You actually had to have the right gifts. You had to be good looking, because they thought that being good looking made you smart, which is not very smart, but that was what they thought. And you had to be good looking, and you had to be athletic, and you had to be actually smart. You had to be all of those things. And if you failed on any of those things, you don't even get to go to school. But that's why they picked the kids they picked from these various areas, is because they fit that mold. So this is like, how in every city or every region, they got like that school where all the special kids go. And I'm not talking about like we call them special because we don't want to insult them somehow. I'm talking about we call them special because they're doing radioactive physics and as 8-year-olds, that kind of stuff. Like me. Just kidding. Not like me. But there are kids who do it. That kind of school. That's the school that Daniel is being brought into. And in this school, there are houses like Hogwarts. Make no mistake about it. There are schools within the school. Now, I can compare it to seminary again as well. When you go to seminary, there are 4 different departments, at least Lutheran seminary. There's 4 different departments. We've talked about this before. Exegetics, systematics, historical, and practical. Should just call them pragmatic because that's really all they do. In theory, practical is supposed to be putting our theology into practice. Usually it becomes, how do we explain why we'd rather be pragmatic than pay attention to our theology? Well, if you're a practical theologian or professor, you can just hate me for that. But I love practical theology, by the way. It's what I do, probably more than anything else. I just disagree with the way it's done most of the time. Anyhow. Practical, historical, that's pretty clear. How has theology been understood in history? How did it impact the lives of people that we can read about, their confessions and things like that? Systematics, this is particularly our confessions. This is how we understand the Bible as a whole and then talk about it with each other, because it's kind of hard to just quote stories. You have to actually see how the stories connect into a bigger picture. That's what systematics does. And then you have exegetics, reading the actual stories, right? So you have these schools, and there's rivalries between these schools within the seminary itself. Oh, I'm an exegete. I prefer exegesis, and the systematicians are wrong. They do it this way, right? And I just did a little bit of it when I bashed the practical department, right? And again, I say that saying if I were anywhere I'd rather teach at the seminary, which I don't want to do. If there were, it'd be in the practical department. That's what I'd want to do. And yet, I'm demonstrating as well a little bit of rivalry, schoolhouse rivalry going on there, right? When I bash it, they don't know what they're doing over there. Well, that's the way the exegetes would talk about them. And they'd talk about the exegetes the same way. Now, it's not quite Slytherin and Gryffindor. I mean, we didn't have mascots. We should. That'd make it more fun, I think. What would the mascot of the exegete be? That's funny, because I know the systematicians, they're the owls. Like, you think exegete, he must be really smart. No. The systematicians are the nerds. Right? They're like the face down in the books, brainiacs dotting their I's and crossing their T's. And sorry, historians, but you're kind of like the sloths. I really mean this. I mean, with my experience, it's just a little Not real hasty. You could be an ant if you'd rather not be a sloth. You're not hasty. Just kind of doing your thing, laying out the information. Here's what happened. Now, history can be done better than that, I think, but that's kind of how it plays out as a school. Man, exegetes are tough. What are those guys? I mean, it's like comparing, Gryffindor to Hufflepuff. It's like, well, how do you get that mascot? Sorry, guys. So exegetes, I'd call them the eagle because they're noble, they're focused, dangerous in good and bad ways. And then the practical department, I mean, that's just it's Slytherin. I'm sorry, guys. I'm sorry. I know you should pay more attention to your confessions. I'm just saying. What they should be, is the workhorse. That's what they should be. And they are when they're at their best. All right, so you got the houses. Well, the houses that Daniel's dealing with. We talked about this last time. You have the men of the stylist, the writers. They were a priestly caste, but they all kind of were. These are those who were the record keepers. The law. They would have been the lawyers in Jerusalem, right? That school. And then you had the whisperers. These are the conjurers that by saying things in just the right way, abracadabra, they just, and then you're dead or whatever, right? They do the magic spells, the incantations. And then you had the magicians. And what's the difference between the magicians and the conjurers? I'm not sure, but they were a different school. They were a different category. Magi is connected to this, so maybe more to do with stargazing, future telling, dream weaving, all that kind of stuff. And then you have the Chaldeans. I mean, this is Gryffindor now, right? So in the land of the Chaldeans, where like everyone's a Chaldean, they have a region for the Chaldeans where all the people who go to the school are Chaldeans. And within the school that they're the Chaldeans, there is one house that they call the Chaldeans. So every level up, there's like a more high level up of Chaldean that you don't get to be a part of unless you're really special. And the Chaldeans were sort of masters of all, and in the strictest sense, were the priests of the priests. Now, there's a possible fifth class as well. Just as an aside, the astrologers, determiners, but whether or not these overlap with the magicians, I don't know. It's hard to say. But let's just stick with the four houses for now, because that fits with Hogwarts. With you got, the Gryffindor Chaldeans at the top, and the Hufflepuff conjurers, and you got the Slytherin whisperers, and you got the Ravenclaw writers downers. That actually works, doesn't it? It's about right. Well, Daniel's taken into this school, and they don't have a sorting hat. So instead, they teach you all of them. And you get to find out what you're good at. And if you're good enough and good enough and good enough, you can be a Chaldean. You got to earn your way into Gryffindor here. Not just birthright kind of stuff. So you got that rivalry. And don't forget now, he's beginning to go to school for this every day, all day. It's not just him. The Philistines, the Phoenicians, the Moabites, they got people from all over the world. People from the east, people from the north, people from Arabia even maybe. I don't know. People from everywhere. People from Africa. Kids his age. Right? So it's like an international Hogwarts with all sorts of ethnicities and cultures all smashing together but being brought into this one singular culture. And just like at Hogwarts, they all ate together in a big hall where the king also ate. And in eating together where the king also ate, they were fed food from the king's table. Now, before we get to that, there are two other pieces I want to clean up here a little bit. I mentioned boys and girls earlier. And so the question is, were girls brought along on this? They certainly, if they were brought along, were not trained. So they didn't go to special school. This was an all-boys special school. Instead, they went to their own special school. Now, what makes me think that this might be true, even though the Bible doesn't really say it, and historically we don't have any proof of it, is the fact that the headmaster of this place, who was over like all of it, this whole area, for the king, like not necessarily one of the Chaldeans himself, but possibly, his primary title is Commander of Eunuchs. Okay, so his name is Ashpenaz. We're going to come back to Ashpenaz, but because he's in the story. But his title is Commander of Eunuchs, which historically means the overseer of the Sarail. Or you might call him, if you're in the Turkish era, the Kislar Aga. He's the guy who makes sure that the harem is not tinkered with by other men, right? So the king, when he's out doing his king kicking everybody's butt thing and taking people's, well, he's a man, and you might not like it, and it definitely is sinful, but he sees pretty ladies. He says, I want the pretty ladies, and he brings the pretty ladies to himself. I mean, David and Solomon even did this, and it wasn't good, but it's pretty normal. Historically, very normal. And so he brings the pretty ladies to himself, but he wants them to be his pretty ladies. He doesn't want to share his pretty ladies. Why would you do that? And so he takes a few guys, and he says, I trust you and all, but we're going to make sure you can't take my pretty ladies. And they eunuchize them, right? You know what that means, right? I mean, just do the math here. They make it so he can't ever do the thing, right? It's just impossible now because it's gone. So this guy, Ashpenaz, is the commander of all of those, which means he's one himself. It means he's in charge of the harem. And he's also in charge of, well, Daniel and the boys, right? All the other young men. So he's kind of headmaster of the special school as well as the overseer of the harem. This is what makes me think that there were girls that came along, that there would have been Hebrew ladies that were taken into the king's private chamber. Now, how many of them? Probably not as many as the men. How many men were there? Kyle and Dale think there was only 5 or 6. If not just Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So it's hard to say. But with that said, you got to imagine this guy, this Ashpenaz guy, when I talk about him in a moment, as being, regal and powerful and fearful. I mean, the guy doesn't live for sex because he can't. He lives for power because that's what he's got. And he's got a lot of it, right? And part of that power is overseeing this group every year or every couple of years that's brought in and started in school and making sure they stay in line and that all the traditions and all the holy things of Babylon get done right. And part of that holy thing of Babylon being done right is the giving of new names to these people. They don't want them to lose their culture entirely because they did believe in sort of a bringing a cross-pollination thing. Yeah, they believe that there was value that other cultures would bring to theirs, and theirs was like the summation of all great things from all cultures. But they did also want them to be first loyal to Babylon, and then only after that to their old culture. So as young men, they're getting new names. And as names always work in the ancient world, these names have meanings. They're not vacuous, they're not just sounds. They're highly intentional. So if you want a sorting hat moment, this is more the sorting hat moment for Daniel and his friends Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. All names that in good Hebrew faithfulness connect to the name of their God. We've talked about Daniel, God is judging, and that is so much the whole theme of the entire book. We've talked about his name. Hananiah means Yahweh is gracious. It's not unconnected to Jonathan, by the way, Jonathan as a name, the gracious gift from God. That's my name, yeah. Hananiah is very close, so God is gracious. God is gracious. Mishael, you can hear again, so you hear the difference? Daniel, L on the back, is God. Daniel, God is judging. Now, you just flip the grammar. How do I say this? The order of words doesn't matter, especially in a name. So you could put the subject at the end. It's not judging God, right? But you can hear the ale is God in the word. So also in Mishael, you can hear the God there. And so that name means like unto God, or one who is like God, Mishael. Whereas with Hananiah, Yahweh is gracious, you don't have an ale on there, you have an Yahweh. And it drops the back end of it. So like Jonathan, Nathan, right? Yah on the front is Yahweh, and Nathan is gift, or gracious gift, as I like to say. So you hear the Yah there. And so that's going to come back with the fourth guy, how you number it, Azariah, right? Which means Yahweh helps. So you have these really faithful guys here. You have God is judging, and Yahweh is gracious, and one who is like God, and Yahweh helps me. And they're given very faithful, pious Babylonian names. Each name connected to one of the Babylonian gods. So Daniel gets the name Belteshazzar, which has at the front of it the word Bel. Now, Bel, originally means the master. Kind of the way that people call Jesus, the master. There's groups that talk about him that way. Maybe not bad, usually, though they don't believe baptism is what the master says baptism is, which is kind of weird, but anyway, potshot. Bel, the master, was the chief god of the Babylonians, who very well may have been Marduk. It seems that is likely, but there's also some unclarity there. But Marduk is also often recognized as the chief god of Babylon. So Daniel gets the name Belteshazzar, the master or the chief god will protect the king, right? The master protects the king, or the real God, the ultimate God protects the king. And this is pretty cool. It's going to come back. Marduk, though, is actually built into the name Shadrach. Shadrach has Marduk. You can't really hear it in English, but it's there. So Hananiah receives the name Marduk something something, and it really is something something. We have no idea what Shadrach means other than the name Marduk is built into it. Mishael, the one who is likened to God, he gets this name Meshach, whose name is also not really sure what the verb in it is, but we're pretty sure that the god that it's connected to is the one who will eventually become Venus. Now, they didn't worship Venus by name, right? But she's the god of romantic entanglements and so forth. So why they called him that, I'm not exactly sure, but Meshach, he gets the name like sexy gods on my side kind of thing, right? And then finally, Azariah, Yahweh helps me, he gets this name Abednego, which is slave of Nebo. So where Marduk is sort of the top god in the pantheon, the Bel, as it were, the master, Nebo's like his right-hand man, or he's up there too. But he's particularly the god of knowledge and the god of scribes. So you got to figure the men of the stylist really like him, and the fact that Abednego, right, Azariah gets that name, they're like, well, you're probably going to be in this house. Nebo's on your side, right? But just in case you think that pencil pushing was sort of for nerds back then, this guy also wore a horned helmet and rode a winged dragon. So, while being the moon god at the same time. So Nebo wasn't some nerdy slouch. So after the Sorting Hat, slave of Nebo, and sexy gods all kind of with me and stuff, and then Marduk something something, and that the master is going to protect the king, they all kind of get shuffled out and start going about life. And the first day, they're brought to the big feast. There's this huge dinner and banquet. It's every day, right? There aren't any house elves making the magical food appear, but the magical food is being brought out. It's being let out. And it's the best portions. I mean, you got filet mignon, and it's cooked medium rare. You got bacon-wrapped shrimp with, dates built in the middle, and you got chicken cordon bleu. Whatever you find beautiful, this is what they're bringing out. But there's a problem. And this problem is one of those things which, if you're ignorant again and want to be and like to be and think that you're smart just because you were born and can know stuff just because you stand there, then you can go really wrong with this. And a lot of Christians do. Because they're willing, they'll say, I just believe what the Bible says. I only believe the words of the Bible, just these 5 sentences, right? And they won't read the rest of it. And they do, but they only read 5 sentences at a time, and they never let it influence itself across books. And so they don't have all the information. Now, again, this is sort of where systematics helps, but actually this is the realm of the exegete. This is where the eagle's got to be able to see more than just the verse he's looking at. So you get these verses, and you know the story. Daniel doesn't want to eat the food, and he asks to only have vegetables and water. We're going to come back to that. I mean, it's a pretty cool part of the story, but he asked for only vegetables and water. So you got these Christians that come in, and they're like, look, God told the Hebrews to only eat vegetables and water, and that's what we should do too if we really want God's blessings on our lives today. And boom, you should believe the Bible and give me money and stuff. And they never sound that stupid when they do it. They sound really convicted. They really believe that if you just will listen to what the Bible says about food here, then there'll be a blessing the likes of which you've never known. But the thing is, this section has nothing to do with the particular value of fruits, vegetables, and water. That is not why Daniel refused to eat the food. It was not because it was meat. He was not a vegetarian. He was a faithful Hebrew. And so you might think, well, then it was because it was pork. Right? It was the bacon on the shrimp. That was the problem. And, well, probably not that. Because there would have been other food. And frankly, the pig would not have been necessarily the most dominant thing to serve. Cow would have been the dominant thing to serve. That's the fatted calf. That's the idea. You're the king. You eat the fatted calf every day. Like that's why you're king. It's good to be the king. That kind of thing. So it's probably not that these are unclean foods. Otherwise, he would have just eaten some of the other meat that was available. There would have been other meat. There would have been clean food available. So what's going on? And this is where his attention to the covenants is so beautiful. What's going on is that this food is, before it's being given, being offered as a sacrifice to the gods of Babylon. Whether it's Bel or Marduk, or they're kind of the same thing probably, whether it's Marduk or Nebo or the king himself, there is a pagan ritual taking place at the dinner table. This isn't asking for grace, but it kind of is. And it's asking for grace in a very extreme and visible and public way, so that this food is now only good for you because Marduk is God. And if you eat it, you are saying Marduk is God, and that he's good for you and you love him lots, and you have a place for him in your heart and all that. Notice how much of that's missing from the ancient world. There's no place for Marduk in your heart. What is that about? Anyway, sorry, tangent. So here you are, Daniel, and all your friends. You're actually they're calling you Belteshazzar. So you're like, okay, my name's Belteshazzar. Belteshazzar is harder to say. is brought in, and he sat down, and he sits there, and he sees all this happening. And he knows exactly what this is. This is the breaking of the covenant. If he takes a bite, he now rejects his God. And he also knows that he's sitting here right now because his former king did this very thing. It's not that he ate the food offered to pagan sacrifices, although he probably did that too. It was that he did not trust in what God had said in his word. That's why he's sitting here. That's why the catastrophe has happened. And so now the question is, since the catastrophe has happened, are you going to be like Jehoiakim back there and plot to have it be your own way and fix it on your own and have to have a prophet preach to you from the bottom of a cell about how you won't listen to the words that would just tell you how it could all be fixed? Are you going to be that? Or are you just going to remember the words? So that's what Daniel does. He remembers the words. Now, was it that night? I don't know. I mean, he didn't eat it. He never ate it. So it had to be pretty quick. And you got to respect the brass on this kid. I mean, maybe he's 17. I'm a 15-year-old kid. And he doesn't, within this, there's lots of people here. It's a big room. There's a bunch of people going on. And so it's not like Ashpenaz is over all of them directly. He's the headmaster, right? So do you just go up and talk to Dumbledore when he's sitting there at the headmaster's table? No, you don't. You don't do that. You might talk to your house leader, or even what do they have, the kids that are like the house chair, right? That's kind of over the kids themselves, an older classman that kind of keeps things in line. So, well, they had that too. They had like these levels of authority, but he doesn't go to the guy that's like directly over him. He goes to Ashpenaz. He goes to the chief of the eunuchs. Now, the brass? This is a bold move. He goes to the chief of the eunuchs, and he says, can I not eat that? Is that okay? You mind if I don't eat that? Now, two things. First, where's the courage coming from? The courage is coming from his trust in the word of the Lord. This is so huge, right? To get him to walk up to this guy and know that his life's actually at risk in this moment. Like he can say, no, you swine who refuses to do homage to the king, and just run him through. I mean, you're a slave. Right? He is risking everything about his life at this moment, but he has something that he's actually trusting, and this is pretty key. This isn't some sort of random hope in God and God will do good things thing. The old covenant was different than the new covenant. We have specific promises too, but we have different specific promises. And we share in some of those same over-the-top, overarching salvation of all promises. But the Old Covenant had some very specific temporal promises with it. Things about this life, which we just don't have. You will search the New Testament far and wide for a promise that you're going to get healed from your sickness, or that your prayers are going to heal a sickness. You will not find it. And don't tell me James. James talks about having the pastors anoint someone who's dying with oil so they'll be saved and not lose their faith in their death. That's what James is talking about. He's not talking about how if we just pray enough, people will get better. So stop with the magical prayer stuff. Sorry, it's my own. I'm just so frustrated by it now. I'm so tired of it because it distracts us from the real promises. We're busy. We're so attached to this life, the present, that we're like, oh man, my 98-year-old grandmother's dying of cancer. God's got a healer. We're like, what? Come on, man. Where do we live? Who are we? Do we believe Jesus rose or not? I don't mean to be a jerk about it. I get it. Death sucks, and no one wants to see anybody die at any age. But we should not believe false promises. That's kind of what Daniel's dealing with. Here's a promise. Eat this food. Life's going to be good. And he's like, no, I have a better promise. And he really did. He did. Deuteronomy 28, which would have been in the Torah, which is the stuff that Josiah would have been having preached, that he would have heard when he went to his Christmas Eve services. Here's what it says for the Old Covenant particularly. And by the way, this does come to pass in Jesus himself, and his resurrection is the fulfillment of this. And you are going to get this promise on the last day. But this promise was given to the Old Covenant people in the temporal. Only Jesus finally kept it, but it was also given and kept by them, and you see it come to pass when they put their trust in it. If you faithfully obey, that is believe, translated as believe, come on ESV, if you faithfully believe the voice of the Lord your God, being careful to do all his commandments, I command you today, the Lord will set you high above the nations of the earth, and all these blessings shall come upon you. Blessed shall you be in the city, and blessed shall you be in the field. Blessed shall be the fruit of your womb. Blessed the fruit of your ground, the fruit of your cattle, the increase of your herds, the young of your flock. Blessed your basket and your kneading bowl. Blessed you when you come in, and blessed you when you go out. The Lord will cause your enemies who rise against you to be defeated before you. They shall come out against you one way and flee before you 7 ways. The Lord shall establish you as a people holy to himself, as he has sworn to you, if you keep the commandments of the Lord your God and walk in your ways. And all the peoples of the earth shall see that you are called by the name of Yahweh, and they shall be afraid of you. So this 15-year-old punk kid walks right up to the chief of eunuchs in the midst of the grand hall at the heart of the school, Bar Shippa in Shinar, during the great feast of consecration where the fatted calf of aplenty has been spilled his blood everywhere and sacrificed to the gods and laid before you to eat, that your life might be long and you might learn the ways of magic and truth. And he says, hey, I'm cool with like half of this. So if there's a way for me to not eat that, we're good. Because here's the thing. My God, who's pretty sweet, I'll tell you about him later. He won't help me if I do that. But if I don't do that, it's gonna rock. Now, we know that I don't know how he said it. We know that he said it sort of like that somehow, because the response of Ashpenaz is actually pretty merciful. Again, he could have just had him killed. I might have. Dude, someone come beat this kid, right? That's kind of how in that world I'm pretty sure I would be. But he has a bone of mercy in him. And the eunuch has to have a bone of mercy. He either becomes a raging hate machine for what was done to him, or if you're a young man who hasn't had what's done to him done, he kind of is like, oh, well, poor kid. Maybe this will happen to you. Maybe I should watch out because I don't want this to happen to other people, right? That kind of thing. So in any case, we know he's a little bit merciful because he doesn't just rage machine on him right away. Instead, he says, look, man, you're new here. Just let me tell you, you do not want the king to see you not doing what the king says to do, and doubly so when he's being good to you. When the king gives you a present, you're like, thank you, sir. Right? So that's the way it works. And here's the other thing. So I get it. You love your religion. That's great and all. I kind of loved mine once upon a time too. But here's the thing. If I don't do this for you, if I let you not do what the king says to do, and the king gets pissed, you know who he's going to get mad at? He's going to have you killed. But guess who else he's going to have killed? Yeah, me, right? And while my life is not what I would have chosen it to be when I was your age, hey, I got oodles of power. I got all the food and drink I could possibly want. People listen to me. I snap my fingers, all this. So, sorry, man. Don't expect me to risk my neck for you. Please go back and sit down at your table. And so Belteshazzar goes back and sits down at his table, and he leans over to the house head boy, Percy Weasley, right, who's sitting there at the table. The steward who the chief marshal, the commander of the eunuchs, the Kislar Aga, had put over that little corner of the room. These Hebrew boys and these Philistine boys. No, you can't have the Phoenician boys. They're reserved for what's his name and da-da-da-da-da. But, he talks to this guy, which again, don't miss the brass. Right? Like the courage. Like he's already been told no by the guy who's in charge. But he's like, hey. So here's the thing, man. Like, what do you say? Would you let me just eat some vegetables? Just go boil some vegetables for 10 days. And I promise that if I don't look good, I'll stop and I'll eat this food. But I'm gonna puke if I eat this food. Like I swear, I'm gonna throw up everywhere. I can't do it. Can I just have some vegetables? I got an intolerance, right? He didn't lie, but I don't know how he said it. But he tells this guy, and this guy's not the guy he was just talking to. So he has the same conversation with this guy. And did he say, "Oh, by the way, your boss said I couldn't do this"? Who knows? But he tries a different tact, and he's striving to remain faithful. He's not a liar. He's not a liar, so he's doing this truthfully. He says, "Just let me try this for 10 days." And the guy lets the test of 10-day come for Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and Belteshazzar. And they're allowed to just eat the vegetables. Now, don't miss this, though. Think about the house politics, the house games, all the rivalries, all that kind of stuff. And now you're one of these Philistine kids sitting at the table with this Belteshazzar jerk-faced Daniel guy. And what was it? That too good for you? What are you doing, you idiot? Man, I don't like that kid. So you got to think, Malfoy, right? Malfoy is in the same house as Potter, and they're like, here they are. And already he's just like, man, what are you, mudblood? What's your problem? Eat the food, man. And Daniel's like, can't eat it. That's all right. But I'm pretty sure it's going to work out for me. And like 10 days later, Malfoy's got like a stuffy nose, and he's got like maybe boils broken out on his face. I mean, it's not that bad. But, he doesn't look good. He doesn't look healthy. Something's wrong with him. And like Potter's sitting there, and he actually like gained 10 pounds and is like ripped. Like he looks good. Like you look at him and he's shining. His face is shining. Now, it wasn't, I'm exaggerating, right? Melodrama here. But how do you think Malfoy felt about that? So when after 10 days, this works out for Daniel and his friends, like this ain't winning friends and influencing people here. Like it makes the guy who's in charge look good. And they're allowed to continue to do this, but this is the first step of many in the hatred that everyone's going to have for Daniel because of his faithfulness to the Word of God. And yet, the blessing, which is constantly given to him for trusting in the promises which he was given to trust in. That his circumcision set him apart, and that faithfulness to the old covenant would indeed cause God to actually physically, in time and space, protect him. And it happened. It happened. And it continued to happen. As Kyle and Dela tell it, as God blessed the resolution of Daniel and his 3 friends, that they would not defile themselves by the food, he also blessed their education, which they received in the literature and wisdom of the Chaldeans, so that the whole 4 made remarkable progress therein. Now again, this had to be just entirely mind-boggling, because on the one hand, the wisdom and literature of the Chaldeans was just infused with paganism. So it's what it was. It was the religion in many ways. It was flush with it, but it wasn't just the religion. It's like Hinduism is today, or even like Islam is today, where the religion and life are just completely mushed together and overlapped. Frankly, Christianity is not that different, although we act like it is. But it was just completely mushed together, so there was some truth in this. There was wisdom here. They did know that star's over there every night at this time of year, right? So even as they're looking at the star trying to tell the future, they're able to tell where the stars are. The stargazing. There's nothing wrong with that. So Daniel and his friends are able to progress in this knowledge in such a way that they demonstrate themselves to be heads and tails above the other students that are with them. And just remember the house competition again here he is. He's 15, and he sets himself apart, and he shows himself better, and he's really good looking, and he's kind of buff. And then he's 16, and he's coming into his manhood now, and look, he just got A's. He can do the potions in potion class. He is no Harry Potter, kind of only good at dark arts stuff, or at Defense Against the Dark Arts. He's good at everything. He's good at everything, right? He's Hermione and Potter, like, fused into one person. And so are his 4 friends, and they are the Quidditch team. And just with 4 of them, and not even they'll beat 7, and there they go do it because these guys are good. Think about how in high school, how'd you feel about those kids? Did you like those kids, the ones that were great at everything? No, you didn't. And now imagine that you're the Phoenicians, who are ancient enemies, right? How are you feeling about these guys? Yeah, what do you think about them? And you're watching them always topping everything else. Age 16, they're even better. Age 17. Wow, these guys are just running the place. Age 18, they're teachers' pets and above. And they managed to do it all the while dodging any actual use of the religion. Now, if you're that other kid, you got to hate these guys. Absolutely hate these guys. Because they make you look bad. Over and over and over again. And it just gets worse. Because when the finals come, final tests, final score, after the 3 years of their study, there's this big to-do where, you can slip up here and it all comes tumbling down. Each one of them individually is brought into the king himself and is placed directly before the king and is questioned by the king. The king gives the final exam. And now remember, did Nebuchadnezzar only see Daniel once before this, and it was that night back in Jehoiakim's, water or salt and bread party, right, where they're making peace with each other. He just, okay, that one's fine, swim him by. Now here he is again. I don't remember him at all. He's just one more of these many, many that we've taken. But he starts to question Daniel. And the more that Daniel answers, the more he keeps questioning. And he's stunned. Because he keeps thinking, okay, I do this all the time, every year, we got to do this, and they're pretty good, and I kind of ask a few things, but his answers are so good, I'm learning from him. And so he keeps asking, and he keeps asking, and he keeps asking, and it goes on and on and on, and Daniel is so intelligent and discriminating that by the end of this, the king says, this guy is wiser than his teacher, who's standing right there, who I put in charge of everything. This guy knows, this is stunning, this guy. The king found him to excel the wisdom, and not just Daniel, all of them. Hananiah, Azariah, Mishael, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, Belteshazzar, all the names. He found them all to be excellent, beyond all the wise men in his own kingdom. Now, what does that mean? Did it mean he got a better job? No, I don't think so. He still had to go pay his dues. But it did mean, when they posted the markings on the wall and everyone's gathered around, who gets top marks? In fact, they gave one piece of paper that says top marks, and actually they're better than you all. You guys don't even count beside these guys. And then here's your guys. Okay, so here's where you're going to your jobs and all this. You know they got the best new jobs. They didn't get sent to Glory Kingdom Heaven. But they didn't get sent to scrub pots and wash toilets either. And Malfoy's sitting over there just fuming. He got a decent job, it's fine, but it wasn't the one he wanted. Potter got that job. Yeah, Daniel got that job. And Daniel chapter 1 ends here with some more reference to dates and the first year of Cyrus, and it's one of those things that causes liberals to have all sorts of crazy again, and it's really easily fixed. We're just going to kind of let it sit there. Because the point here, again, is set up because it is probably in this same year that Daniel graduates. Shortly after this. So he's just been placed at his new job, and he got into the Chaldeans, right? So he gets to do a little bit of everything. He's basically a manager. He's overseeing people already. But every night he's got to go home, make his cup of tea, sit on his roof garden, and just kind of stare at the city and hope for better things someday, and be thankful that he gets to eat food that is not defiling him and has not been made to bow down to anybody. So he's just kind of living that life, and it's very, very short, but he's got to be thankful. Well, thank you, God, for this. This has not been so bad. I know they don't like me, but whatever. I can live with that. He finishes his tea, and the sun goes down, the starry night, sounds of the city is all real beautiful and all that, right? And he goes down to his room, stretches out on his mattress, rests a little bit. Shut eye, tomorrow's a big day. And he drifts off. He's sleeping, but then... What was that? He gets up, rubs his eyes. Gosh, oh my. Whew, need some water. He makes his way to the door, and door's knocking. The door keeps knocking. He opens the door, and who's there but the chief assassin of the king of Babylon? And he's got his blade drawn, and other troops standing right behind him. And he's holding that blade right at your throat. All because the king had a dream.
Was that worth $1? What about $5? Project Resurrection is made possible by listeners like you and your patronage of my husband's work. Click the Patreon link in the show notes to sign up. Pretty please?